You've probably heard that you need to mono the low end of your mix. If you look almost anywhere online, you'll see this advice nearly universally given. But have you ever taken the time to vet this advice for yourself? Have you ever spooled up some of the most successful commercial mixes in our current day and age and seen if they're actually doing this? Because I did. Check this out. What's that? There's a ton of information going on down in the sides in the bottom end. Maybe that's a one-off though. Let's take another example. These songs are from the top 100 most streamed songs on Spotify in the last year. They're by some of the world's most successful artists. So if their engineers are leaving information in the sides down in the bottom end, what do these engineers know that you don't? Is it actually still true that you need to mono the low end of your mix? Or is doing so actually robbing your song of something special that these highly successful commercial mixes have going on? We need answers. So join me as I peel back the onion and get to the bottom of this. Let's go. So here are the big questions I'm going to aim to answer. First is, why are we told to mono the low end of our mix in the first place? And are the arguments for that still valid today? Second is, if you are going to mono the low end of your mix, how do you do that exactly? Because I can tell you the way a lot of people are approaching this, they're getting it wrong and they're actually unnecessarily compromising the bottom end of their mix. 3, does this vary at all by genre? Is this relevant for you and the style of music that you create or engineer? We're going to be using a lot of audio examples over the next few minutes, so please make sure you're either using headphones that have proper bass extension or you're listening on speakers that go down that low. If you're listening on laptop speakers, a phone, or earbuds, you're just not going to hear this stuff. So the argument to put the bottom end of your mix into mono goes a little something like this. Number 1, we're told that you need to make space for the kick and the sub. That is based on the assumption that having information in the sides down there will be masking the kick and the sub in some significant way, and that there's nothing else to be done about that. Number 2, we're told that it increases headroom, and that having information in the sides will rob you of headroom, and by stripping out the information in the sides in the bottom end, you will significantly free up headroom, and that you need every ounce of headroom that you possibly can because it will make a meaningful difference in the quality of your music. Number 3, we're told that it improves correlation, and that that's important to us because many sound systems that we might listen on, PAs certainly, and some home and monitoring environments will have subs that are configured in mono. And that is based on the assumption that you cannot have sides information in the bottom end and also have substantial and sufficient correlation. So these are all assumptions that are worthy exploring and vetting, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm a really big fan of taking the theoretical and stress testing it in a real world environment. So to that end, we're going to take a song written by DJ IBG, otherwise known as Ian Gallagher, one of our instructors here at Warp Academy. It's a tech house song, and let's just have a listen to the drop. Okay, great. So let's fire up Voxengo Span. I have span configured in mid-side, so you can see with the light blue area, that's the sides of the signal, and in the dark blue area is the mid of the signal. You can see the level of the mid versus the sides over on the level meter here, and you can see correlation. So you can see there's information that is down in the sides here, especially with that bass stab, certainly under 100 Hertz. And let's just take a look at what's actually going on down there and listen to it with Pro Q3. So I have a sides filter here in mid-side mode. And when we engage that, we can actually listen to it. So that's what's going on down in the sides. You can see there is a significant amount of information there, and you have to make a judgment call. Is that conflicting with the low end of the song? And is that going to be a problem if the song is summed to mono? Let's just go ahead and do that. So there's strong correlation down there. We're seeing on the correlation meter. Correlation is excellent. I'm not feeling a loss of energy in the bottom end, but in fact, if we do turn on this filter and we strip out the sides information, I'm feeling a dramatic loss of energy down there. There's something special that's down there that actually makes the song feel wider, bigger, fuller. In the words of somebody who I respect, David Nazi from Mixbus TV,
not just wide and pretty at the top, but with balls, right? Which are in the low mid range.
So now let's talk about the headroom thing and see if that argument holds up to scrutiny. I've looped up a smaller section of the song so we can see peak level, and I'm going to use mastering the mix levels to be able to look at peak level. So we're seeing peak level of negative 5.5 dB. Let's go ahead and open up Pro Q3 and let's strip out the sides. We can see the impact there. We have improved headroom by 0.1 dB. Is that a significant amount? Absolutely not. If the success of your song and reaching your desired level of loudness in your music comes down to 0.1 dB, 0.5 dB, even a dB, then you're missing the plot. And is it worth the trade-off, you have to ask yourself, of losing potentially valuable information on the sides? Now, I know what many of you are going to be saying. You're going to be saying, hey, what about linear phase EQ? Okay, so let's redo the test and let's go to linear phase EQ. Okay, and redo the test. So again, we're seeing negative 5.5. Let's engage the linear phase sides filter. Same result. Okay, so let's disable Pro Q3. And I want to talk about the other method that a lot of you will be using, especially if you're Ableton Live users, which is using the utility. And in other DAWs and in other plugins, you will see similar features, which is a bass mono feature, okay? And this is where we're getting into territory where you're actually missing something really critical and damaging the integrity of your music. So let's go ahead and really strip out the sides. We're going to use 200 Hertz and we're going to engage bass mono. What's that done to our level? Again, similar to Pro Q3, we've gotten 0.1 dB of additional headroom by doing that. But what's actually happening here, I'm going to touch on in a minute, because it's actually, as I said, damaging the integrity of your song in a meaningful way. Okay, let's go ahead and take that off. Now, some of you may be thinking that I've cherry-picked a specific example to prove my point. And so to that, I would say, let's have a listen to another commercial mix. So it's coming in kind of where we'd expect. There's a little bit of limiter margin at the very top. It's not clipping. And let's take the utility again and mono the bass, everything from 200 on under. Look at all that sides information we've removed and look at what's happened to our peak level. We're now nearly 2 dB over and it's clipping. So with that said, in the examples that I've chosen and in many of the other examples that I've looked at, stripping out the sides information does not create any meaningful increase in headroom. So to me, that argument is not valid. If you need the extra headroom, get better in your mix, use techniques that allow for a louder mix if you really need that 0.5 dB of headroom. And you should really be asking yourself as an engineer or producer if a couple tenths of a dB or 1 dB even is preventing you from getting your song to where you want it to be. That is a problem in your mix or in your sound design and your production. It is not a problem of having sides information down in the bottom end, in most cases. So let's take a look at the correlation thing now. I'm gonna switch genres and we'll use an example in hip hop. Get that check like I never did before. Yeah, I'ma spend that check like I never did before. Ride off in that vet like I never did before. Yeah, I'ma leave it wet like I never did before. Yeah, I do everything. Okay, so this example is working well. That's because this 808 on the bottom end is completely in mono. So I've constructed a specific example that I would never do in real life, but unfortunately you do see sometimes from inexperienced producers, sound designers, and I've constructed a out of phase super wide bass. So let's just flip over to that. Okay, now let's flip it to mono and see what happens. Not a baby, but I check like I. So we're hearing that nasty thing that we never want to hear in a track, which is when you fold it to mono, the sides information, the width of the antiphase signals is canceling a good portion of the bottom end. Now, if you've done this, this is not an issue with mixing. This is a problem with production. This is a sound design problem. And in the words of one of my favorite comedians, Uncle Roger,
you fucked up.
And if you waited to solve this issue, if you went past this in your production process.
Wait, what? What?
And you waited until the mix to solve this with mixing.
Oh, no. You also fucked up.
Now let's show you how I would approach this. I would not use this wide synth bass in the slightest. I would use our regular 808. And I've built an 808 where you can introduce stereo width. So let's fire up span and mastering the mix levels. We can see that it's perfectly in mono, pretty much. We've got our stereo field showing. We can see no sides information. Now let's add in some width. Okay, we can see the sides information starting to come in. It's widened that 808. We can see it as well over here in levels. But how does it sound when we fold that down to mono?
I do everything like it's the first time. Told you what it was, I know you heard now. I do everything like it's the first time. If you're not on my time, then you get curved now.
Depending on how hard you push the width, it really retains its integrity. And that's because the sound design on this has been approached very differently. Okay, so it is, hopefully you're realizing now, completely possible to have width down fairly deep into the bottom end of your song, even if it's with your bass, and still retain sufficient correlation for this to sound good on a system that has subs that are configured in mono. So at this point, we've methodically disproven that always monoing your bass is good advice. There are examples that are perfectly valid where having a wide bottom end is actually advantageous, but there are rarely absolutes in music production. So what I will implore you to do is to evaluate the song that you're mixing or that you're producing and see what it needs. Now that you know how to test this stuff, listen to what's going on down there and make a judgment call for yourself if cutting off the low end sides is really necessary. Okay, let's move on. So if you are going to put your bass in mono, let's take a look at how you might do that, the best practices. We'll go back to our Tech House example and we'll start by showing how not to do it. So we'd established earlier that putting the bass in mono using the bass mono function increases level, right? And I want to show you what this is doing behind the scenes. So if we use a EQ8 and we put it into mid-side mode and we shift over to the sides and then we instantiate a high-pass filter, that's what it's doing. It's cutting off the sides, right? And I want to demonstrate to you an additional negative impact that this is having that you can't see, but you can definitely hear, and it is impacting your music. So if we flip over to Plugin Doctor, this is going to enable us to look at what's happening. So we'll do the same thing in Pro Q3. We're not going to work in mid-side here. I'm just going to show you very simply. We're going to put in a high-pass filter. We'll make it at the same filter slope as it was in the bass mono. And you can see the impact that that's having. It is getting rid of the bottom end. But what happens when we look at phase? Now, what's that? We're seeing that the cut filter is creating massive phase rotation at the cutoff frequency. This impact on phase will cause your track to lose integrity, punch, impact around the cutoff frequency because the sides of the signal will now be out of phase to a degree with the mid of the signal. And that's universally a bad idea. You can see that it gets worse the steeper the filter gets. Now, with a filter like this, it has a linear phase mode. And when you engage that, we can see the impact on phase nearly goes away. But what happens if you don't have a linear phase filter? Linear phase is great. You can use that if you want to cut the sides on your mix, but there are solutions for you as well, even if you are not using a linear phase filter. So if we get rid of Pro Q3 here, and we instead just instantiate a regular non-linear phase EQ, this one's freeware, TDR Nova. And we can see if we use the high pass filter, we see that familiar impact on the phase of the signal. Let's disengage the high pass filter and instead we'll use one of the regular nodes. We'll put it in a low shelf, and instead we'll just drop the frequency. Okay. So we're seeing a mild impact on phase, but we are not seeing that same phase rotation. Okay. So you would instead put this EQ from stereo mode into difference mode. It's the same as sides in Pro Q3, and you would filter those out using a low shelf. Or another alternative is you could change the filter type from a shelf to a subtractive bell. You could put that bell down in the bottom end of your mix. You could drop the gain, and then you could play with the Q value of the bell, and that will give you an advantageous result compared to a cut filter in terms of its impact on phase, and it will allow you to get kind of a cut filter shape by manipulating the Q. This is a technique, I'll give props here to David Nazi from Mixbus TV, that I picked up from him, and this could be very effective for you if the subtractive low shelf isn't doing it. So if you are going to put the bottom end of your song into mono, these are the ways you can do it: linear phase EQ, or using a regular EQ with a low shelf or a subtractive bell, and then playing with the Q. You have some tools at your disposal now that won't deteriorate the phase of your song. The final question I'm going to cover is, does this vary at all by genre? And is this relevant for you in the style of music that you produce or mix? So we've been looking at stuff in hip hop and pop, a little bit of tech house. Why don't we take a look at some straight up banger electronic bass music? Very clear that we have some sides information all the way down to 35 Hertz. Let's take a look at Noisia. Not so much, right? They've pretty aggressively cut any sides information in the low. You can see it's starting to roll off for maybe 120 and extends down to about 55 Hertz. So there's your answer for you. It does depend by genre. And what I want you guys to do is think for yourselves. Test this stuff, take a look at some of your favorite artists, some of your favorite engineers, and what they're doing. And that can help you inform what to do in your genre with your style. So if you've been putting the bottom end of your mix into mono on autopilot on every project, you might be feeling a little sheepish right now. And that's completely natural. It's normal for us to look to people who have the perception of more experience and to follow what they recommend when we don't have confidence in our abilities, our ear, or we're lacking in experience. I too, when I was getting started, used to do that. I used to take advice without really critically thinking about it myself. And I too have recommended to mono the bottom of your mix on this channel before. But I'm not so proud that I'm not willing to admit when I was wrong, and I'm not willing to reevaluate the advice that I'm giving and my beliefs. There's a great quote, it's called "Strong Beliefs Loosely Held." And what that means to me is that we always have incomplete knowledge, and we need the confidence to be able to teach or implement things based on our incomplete knowledge. But we should never hold on to our beliefs so strongly that we're not open to new information and ready and willing to rethink the way we approach things. So I really want to implore you, rather than doing anything on autopilot, just taking advice at face value and implementing it, to test this stuff for yourselves. Okay? Now, if you enjoyed this video, I'm going to recommend a couple to follow up with. One is if you're mixing in headphones, then watch the video called "How to Mix Better in Headphones." It will definitely improve your results and show some stuff to you that you may not have heard before. Also, if you're mixing on monitors, then we have a video on how to set up, test, and improve your room by using speaker positioning and monitor calibration. Right on. Boom, that's it for this one. I'll catch you guys next time. Much love and happy music making. Cheers.